Okay, so there are privacy threats around every corner, and we've heard some of the doom and gloom already. So I want to take the approach that we live in an imperfect world. Thankfully, there are people who I consider to be privacy freedom fighters, like the commissioner who we heard from earlier, and Simon Davies, who will be talking to us later. So we live in an imperfect world, but that's where we live. So let's get on with it, and let's do what we can practically. Yeah, so there is a privacy continuum. I think of it this way anyway. At one end, you have people who say, I don't care about my privacy, which I personally don't buy, and I'll explain why. But then at the other end, there are people who would be the privacy zealots, and probably some of you are considering yourself at that end, like I do myself a little bit. Well, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, the only thing worse than being talked about is when no one's talking about you. I think we all know people like that, artists and actors, but we're all a little bit like that. If somebody's saying something nice about us, something that's good and true, we don't mind, bring it on. Or even if they post a picture of us that's flattering, that's a good thing. So it all depends on the person, on us individually, whether we think something is at one end or the other, and also on the topic. For example, actors are people too, and like some of us, they have children. And when it comes to the topic of their children's likeness and exactly where they are at any particular instant in time, they're probably over at that other end, at the zealot end. So the same person has different concerns about privacy. So it all depends if something's practical or impractical. It's going to depend how important it is to you. Now I'm going to talk about three main areas. The physical realm. This is old school. Most of the physical privacy threats we understand fairly well, but it's good to renew, so we'll go quite quickly through that. Then there's the virtual world, i.e. online. Things are changing much more quickly in the online world, so some of those things that we can use to deal with the privacy threats are less clear. And then finally, smartphones. They were mentioned already today. You might wonder, well, that's kind of a strange grouping, but I think smartphones are really interesting, a confluence of the physical and the virtual. So I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of measures, and you can decide. Some will be practical for you, some will not. Think of it as like a smorgasbord or a wine tasting, and one of the ones I throw out, you might go, ugh, that's just not practical. But the next one you might go, that's practical, I can do that. So, talking about physical stuff. Last year here I spoke about surveillance, so I feel compelled to tell this one story because it's about surveillance again, and there was a related item that came out in the news just last week. This is the IC mannequin made by an Italian company. What's special about it is one of the eyes is replaced with a high-resolution camera, and embedded inside the mannequin is advanced facial recognition software. And the company boasts that they can tell the age, gender, and race of the people who look at the store display. Is that a privacy threat? You decide. Interesting to note that same company, they said they're testing software that recognizes words. That's kind of interesting, but is there anything we can do about that? Remember, I said some of these things will be practical, some you probably won't think are practical. This is the item I was referring to. It was on the front page of the BBC website last week. The privacy visor. This is a researcher in Japan. He's come up with this visor. It's quite amazing how it'll defeat all the facial recognition, and yet most of his face is uncovered. Who wants to wear this tomorrow? Probably not very practical, but don't discard everything. For example, this might be developed and improved in the very near future, and I can imagine some people might think it's practical. Kate Middleton, for example, hounded by paparazzi, or political protesters. So it's not really that practical for probably anyone here. Depends how famous you are. RFIDs, that's another thing from the physical realm that we probably understand. How many here have one of these? You're daily crossing the bridge from Halifax to Dartmouth or back. Privacy issues, probably not. There's not a lot of personal information in those devices. So largely a theoretical risk. If you were concerned, there's an alternative. Carry the change. really, sometimes it's a choice between convenience and privacy, but the threat is not that big. Here's another RFID story that's going to affect almost everyone here in July. If you renew your passport anytime after July, you will have an RFID embedded passport. Now, Passport Canada assures us that, don't worry, they can't be read from more than 10 centimeters away. What's stored in that RFID chip, which is remotely readable up to 10 centimeters away, is your photo, your name, basically everything on page 2 except your signature. Try 200 feet. Every country where they've introduced the RFID passports, researchers have been able to extend that to in the order of 200 feet, sometimes a bit more. So, what can we do about that practically? Well, I renewed mine early. Mine was good until November. And because I'm way over there out at the zealot end, I thought, we better renew ours early. So my whole family and I went and renewed our passports. So we just squeaked by, because they're piloting them right now. But the other thing you can do is use one of these, RFID passport, or RFID shielded passport wallet. I think it's quite telling that this has become a recognized privacy threat when, this was given to me as a sort of a gag gift about 2 years ago, but now you can buy them at Future Shop. I mean, they're that commoditized. So I think that's quite practical, and many of you here might want to consider using that starting in July once you get your new passport. I want to talk about IDs generally. Remember, I'm throwing out kind of a scattergun approach. Think about what might work, what might not. I think you should always use the lowest form of ID possible. Like, if anybody still rents movies in a store, I don't know how many people do that anymore, but they used to say, well, we need some ID. Well, you could show them a credit card or a healthcare card. Which one would you choose? Well, using this principle, use a credit card. And another thing to think about is that watch out for abuse. Like, if you're dealing with a store and you have some merchandise you want to return, sure, they want to establish, well, are you really the person who bought it from us? Otherwise, maybe you were a shoplifter and now you're effectively selling it back to them. But when you hand them the ID, what they're supposed to do is look at it, look at you, and say, okay, that's a match, and hand it back. So they're allowed to examine it. They're not supposed to copy it. The world is a messy place. Not all the privacy issues have been sorted out, so you shouldn't have to do these kind of things, but complain. Sometimes abuse occurs and you couldn't stop them from doing the photocopying. Complain about it. That's why we have privacy commissioners. One reason. Just an acknowledgement that the world is a messy and sometimes dangerous place, privacy-wise. When you're traveling, sometimes it's just not going to work out. I was in Italy 2 years ago, and I needed to use the business center in the... Am I still on? Okay. Use the business center. I had to print a document for the car rental company. They demanded my passport, and just because I wanted to use the printer. And so I thought that's pretty unreasonable, but I said, okay, how are you securing it? Where is it stored? How long do you keep it? They keep it indefinitely. That was... But I had no other choice, so just be prepared. Sometimes in this imperfect world, you might have to cave in, especially when you're traveling. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the world we live in. Like I said, let's be practical here. Sensitive paper documents. Here's a simple solution. Has everybody signed up for e-statements? Maybe not, maybe you've been sitting on the fence, but just think about it. You get all those documents sent in the mail, credit card statements, bank statements, so potential for loss within the mail system, or your mailbox might be stuffed so full it explodes and it's blowing around in the street. So, get the e-statements. Also invest in a cross-cut shredder. Those statements that e-statements, you might be saving them on optical disc, or you have some old paper ones. When you're done with them, shred them. All the modern shredders, or almost all the modern shredders, will let you shred the optical discs as well. And finally, credit checks. And here's another thing where it shouldn't have to be this way. There was the HRSDC data breach that we heard about. This is not a preventative measure. Getting a credit check is a detective measure. Maybe you can do something about it. This is not a credit report. A credit check is where it's a list of your credit cards and loans. You get that, and you make sure that they're all you, and it wasn't somebody pretending to be you taking out a loan in your name. There are two credit reporting agencies in Canada that I'm aware of, TransUnion and Equifax. By law, they have to give you that credit check for free. By law, it's once per year. So if you go back and forth between those two companies, you can go every 6 months. I'm recommending do it at least once a year, even if you haven't been exposed to like this HRSDC credit data breach. You do it annually, and the really nice thing for those people who live near here or especially work on this campus, the TransUnion office is just adjacent to campus, so you can do it in person. There's one last copy of documents that have to be sent through the mail. Hard drives and flash drives, when you're done with those, no longer need them or you're upgrading, make sure you wipe them. The procedures for doing this are well established, so I'm not going to dwell on them today. We have a web page that explains how to do that. Either you or someone who does your IT support could do it. Whatever school you're at or what your place of employment is, they might have their own instructions. This brings me to desktops, and this is going to be a really nice segue from the physical to the virtual world. We've all heard we should have a clean desktop. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to have your geek toys on your desk. It means the sensitive documents shouldn't be on your desk, ideally. Well, you should also have a clean virtual desktop. If you're ever doing what we're doing here, where you have a computer hooked up to a projector and you haven't cleaned your search history, you have some pictures you'd rather not have everybody see, you have to clean your computer up before you hook it up to the projector. And here's, I can't show you sort of really horrible examples, so I'll show you a funny one. This was from a Reddit post. Somebody here told me about it. This is an actual photograph taken here at Dalhousie, and this is a professor who's trying to be humorous to keep his class awake or see who's paying attention. So it's blurry because it's a real picture, but personal correspondence with Megan Fox, rejection, plans for taking over the world on the 20th of September, extreme torture version of a test. So apparently a few profs do this where they slip in pictures of their pets. But this same Reddit post, further down in the comments, I don't think it was a Dalhousie student, but several students said, yeah, this happens too often, and I'm sitting in the back kind of in this agitated state because every time my prof pulls up his YouTube video search history to show the class a video, he sees things he wished he hadn't seen. Okay, so the virtual stuff. It all begins and ends with accounts. Now, I know this is a privacy conference, not a security conference, but this is where the two really, really come together. The security of your account is going to affect your privacy. Use good passwords. Probably hundreds of people here have heard me say this, but treat it like a toothbrush. Choose a good one. Don't share it with anyone and change it occasionally. We probably beat that to death here, so I'm not going to say any more about it. But more and more services allow you to, let's say, use your Twitter account to connect to the other service, or use your Facebook account. So another practical measure that we can do is to separate the accounts. You have to weigh that against the inconvenience of having yet another account to keep track of. So you decide what's practical or impractical for you. And this, I think, is a really important one. Don't over-disclose when you're signing up for your account. And earlier we heard, well, I'm not picking on company X. Well, okay, I'm not picking on Skype. I'm just going to use this because it's a really good example, and I got some great screenshots. This is if you're signing up for a Skype account. It's a long form, so I've just broken it into two parts. Notice at the top, that's what I was saying about separating the accounts. You don't have to use your Microsoft or Facebook account. You can go create a brand new account. But pay attention to the asterisks. You need a last name, you need a first name, and you need an email address. The email address has to be a real one because you have to communicate with this service. I looked through the terms and conditions. I didn't see that it has to be a real name. I maybe stand corrected on that. I read the terms and conditions. So put in a fake name. Something to consider. This is the bottom half of that same screen. Now notice the asterisks. Also notice the comment at the very top. Anyone on Skype can see your personal information. So they're going to come out and ask you for your birthday, but you don't have to put it in. Don't put in your birthday, your gender, your city, your mobile phone number. Now I know more and more we're using mobile phones if we lose control of an account to get it back, so you might still want your phone number in there. But don't give away too much information. Terms and Conditions, I said I read it. Terms and Conditions is the name of a movie, a documentary that was released exactly a week ago at a major film festival, and it sets up the next topic quite nicely. I'm not picking on any company, remember. The audio's gone. Is it muted? Good question. It is, indeed. Technology. Okay, I'll just start here. You'll get the gist.
Google is effectively a $500 a year service because that's the value of the data that you're providing.
If they use 10% of that data, they're going to be the most valuable company ever.
Companies that you've never heard of claim to have about 1,500 points of data on the average American citizen.
Is it hard to go through it and actually find specific details about a person?
No, that's super easy. Within a couple of minutes, you can figure out what people voted for, what psychological problems they have, what parties they've been to.
They're saying it's because I agreed to the latest terms and conditions on iTunes.
No one has read the terms and conditions. No one in the world.
To the extent there have been contract decisions, they've held that these terms and conditions are valid.
And what if your phone came with these long terms and conditions said, well, if you use the phone, the government can wiretap you? That would be insane. But that's the kind of world we're living in.
Anything that's been digitized is not private. And that is terrifying.
For the government to get information from a Google or a Facebook is a lot easier than the government doing it itself and putting a wiretap on our phones.
You have to put these powers into somebody's hands.
Like social networks in recent times.
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Well, that's always what scared me, was if there's some sort of automated system that just red flags you based on the search term.
You can see that surveillance measures are being used to silence protests before they even happen.
Boom, NYPD SWAT, their bulletproof vests on, their guns drawn.
I was like, are you being serious? Are you actually holding me because of a tweet?
So we were locked away in Lewisham Police Station for 25 hours.
All these powerful institutions, they're not subject to the same invasions of privacy as the rest of us are.
So far, the population seems fine with it. If they weren't, they know who to call.
Okay, next I want to talk about web tracking, and I thought that was the perfect lead-in. So how's web tracking done? Well, it's done through a number of ways. Cookies, which we've all heard of. I'm not going to talk about that. URL referrer, that's where the website you go to knows which link you click to get there. There's a simple solution. You right-click and open a new tab. Third-party affiliates, i.e. advertisers. Now, I think all of us recognize that advertising pays the bills. Advertising is not evil, in my opinion. I don't mind watching ads, tasteful ads, but it's the silent tracking that I personally find troubling. So we're trying to stay practical here. What can you do about the tracking? Well, for where you're being tracked when you're browsing, I have a couple tools you could look at. Collusion, it's a Firefox plugin. Unfortunately, it's only available in Firefox right now, and it's for examining the tracking. It vividly shows you the tracking that's going on, and I would say it's quite practical. It's maybe good to do once in a while to find out how much of this is going on. I'm going to show you some slides. You don't have to learn how to use them right now. Request policy, that actually lets you block the tracking. I submit to you it's probably not that practical. I use it. Some of the geeks in the audience will probably be interested in trying it, but it requires a lot of tuning. So I'm just going to jump ahead and show you. This is a single web page that I went to at the BBC. First off, all the tracking information on that computer, no cookies, nothing. I visited one web page, the one in the middle with the blue halo, and you can see there are 5 other circles there. Well, 3 of them have the word BBC in them, so probably they're wholly owned subsidiaries, and I probably don't care. The other two, not so clear what those are. That's the collusion. It shows you exactly the collusion going on between all these affiliates. This is request policy for the same web page. That's the actual, you can see on the side, the web page. So here are the 5 blue ones or green ones I specifically allowed, because I learned that over time, if I want to see the content I want, I need those on. Some of the other ones are probably the advertising that is tracked in the background. Like I said, I don't mind seeing the ads. I just don't want to be silently tracked. This is, again, I cleaned the computer off. This is 10 minutes of unprotected browsing. The blue halo, which I know is really hard to see because there's just so many of these websites. All the white ones got put in arrows on. Those are the 11 I specifically went to. All the other ones were sent information about me, predominantly the IP address and some other information. So I went to 11, and what's that, like 50 or 60 that have information about my visit. Notice the 3 largest ones. I've circled them red just so you can see them. I looked those up. If you hover the cursor over, it tells you it's DoubleClick, which is Google's advertising division, Google Analytics, which is their analytics division, and the one in the middle, you can probably make out the Facebook fave icon. I didn't log into Facebook. I went to 5 different websites. Anybody want to guess why? Oh, they're largest because most traffic is going there. The like button. I think I heard somebody say that. The like button. Even if you don't have a Facebook account or you're not logged in and you don't click the like button, just going to the website that the 11 that I chose from, because there's a like button, Facebook knows about it. What about tracking your searching? Okay, trying to be practical. Are there some things you can do if you don't want to be tracked? Startpage.com is one of them. I've been using this for 2 years. Its claim to fame, well, there's going to be another one, but what they do, they've specially configured their servers, and they promise, I'll jump ahead, they promise that they never save your IP address. All other web servers, when you visit them for anything, looking at one picture, your IP address is just automatically stored. Startpage.com doesn't do that, and they also have a proxy feature. That's what I meant by their claim to fame. DuckDuckGo, funny name, but that's another one. I see some thumbs up at the back. It has some more custom features, but it doesn't offer the proxy. Again, showing is better than trying to explain it. Okay, suppose you were searching for the Sexual Health Center. This is the actual web page, what it looks like if you do the search. If you click the large blue link at the bottom, now you would go to that web page. When you go to a normal web page, like clicking that link, they'll have your IP address, but there's also the proxy feature with startpage.com. So they go to the page for you and then show it, so no one has your IP address. And there's a bar at the top, so you're clued into the fact that this is proxied, and there's an unproxied button. The thing is, when somebody offers a proxy service, they kind of take effectively more responsibility. The pages are a little bit slower to display, and some code can't be transmitted across, so it might just might be blank at the bottom. So you can't always use this. Are these tools practical? Well, like I said, I've been using for 2 years, but I'm probably off the edge here on the zealot scale. I think it is. If you're a privacy zealot, yes, these tools are practical. For everyone else, well, think about if you're searching for something really sensitive, maybe use these tools. Maybe you want to stick with your standard Google or whatever other search you use. But when you're doing really sensitive searches like sexually transmittable infections, for example, whatever it is, whatever's sensitive for you, basically any search that you don't want showing up if you forget to log out of your Gmail account. Somebody sits down at the computer, and if you forgot to log out and you're using Google to search and Google for your mail, that can all be found out. Alternatively, and wouldn't this be nice if the medical profession could do everything for you? Is that readable at the back? It's a medical issue. Delete my browser history. So social media is the next big category. It's been mentioned a whole bunch of times today already. And I'll just give you one example where and why there could be some privacy threats. This story is from the day after Christmas. Randy Zuckerberg, sister to the CEO, and she used to be a high-level employee. She posted a picture that she thought was private and then found out somehow everybody else was looking at it. I think what happened is that she had her settings so that friends of friends could see her photos. I say think because the controls are really, really complicated. She actually made 2 errors. The first one was not understanding the controls, which they're complicated. If you want some assistance, there are people who put out best practices, like Sophos has a good one, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. But it's not easy. The Ontario Privacy Commissioner used to have the same sort of page. I think it's close to 2 years ago now that she abandoned that and said, frequent changes make it exceedingly difficult to stay current. So those controls, they're hard to understand. The second mistake she made is she forgot about the Streisand effect. Has everybody heard of this? Okay, Barbara Streisand had some waterfront property on the west coast, I think it was California. There was a soil erosion study, so they had high-resolution photos taken by planes flying up and down the coast. All the pictures were posted on a public webpage. She bitched about that and said, that's an invasion of privacy. Everything went back and forth, and she complained and complained. In the end, it was ruled that, no, those pictures stay there. But now we all know about it because she made such a stink about it. Sometimes it's best just to keep quiet. And I'm talking about the privacy breaches that you create yourself, like where you accidentally give something away. If the government or a company you're dealing with gives your information away or leaks your information, yeah, hold them to task. But for yourself, don't forget the Streisand effect. That might be a practical approach. Other things like separate work and personal and don't let them mix. Like LinkedIn, if you use that, keep that for work. Facebook for personal. Keep them separate. And don't post too much information because in the end, whatever you put on the web, you have to think of it as permanent because it basically is. And also assume the controls will ultimately fail. With social media especially, new changes are rolled out and they seem to keep defaulting to opt out. So by default, you've got the new controls, which are usually weaker. Cloud storage was mentioned. I'll just talk about this really briefly. Just some practical things. The encryption must be really solid. Peter mentioned that. I feel bad for putting that key thing on there, but there's well-known encryption that we can use, the AES 256. Here's the thing, though. Think about who holds the decryption key. I'm not picking on companies. I picked 5 at random. Peter had a whole bunch on his screen, or his slide. Dropbox, they hold the key. This is well established because they can do what's called deduplication, so we know for sure they hold the key. It means they can look through your data. If it's not personal, who cares? You have free storage. Kinetic D, you hold the key. I'm just picking a couple at random. Titan File, which I only found out about recently. It's also hosted in Canada. If that's an issue for you, you hold the key. Mega, the reason I put this example up, because this is another recent story. A week and a half ago, Kim.com, German national, lives in New Zealand, operated MegaShare, which was taken down because so many people using MegaShare were hosting copyright infringing materials. Anyway, this is his new offering, just opened up a week and a half ago. The bar is really high, 50 gigs free. Like, that's amazing. We probably all would want to use that. They claim, they have lots of language around how the fact that you have the key, but they do something really weird. So when a service is brand new, be careful. I uploaded my family videos there. You might think, for somebody who's way over here on the zealot end, that's kind of strange. TrueCrypt, free software. You encrypt it first, then it doesn't really matter what's done at the other end. So I'm using Dropbox and Mega. And the cloud, by the way, is fantastic for avoiding data loss. I mean, my house could burn down. It doesn't matter. My videos are out in multiple places on the cloud. So that brings us to smartphones. And again, I have another short video. Okay, I have to set this one up really quickly. A journalist named Nolan, in this TED Talk, I just got a snippet of it, he is explaining how journalists can now use free web tools to find out who took a photo or video so they can get permission to use it in their journalistic endeavors.
If it's true, if it's faked, or if it's something that's old and it's been reposted. So we set about going to work on this video, and the only thing that we...
Sorry. And I should have said they found a really interesting video of a lightning strike that they wanted to use.
Had to go on was the username on the YouTube account.
There was only one video posted to that account, and the username was Rita Krill. And we didn't know if Rita existed or if it was a fake name. But we started looking, and we used free internet tools to do so. The first one was called Spokeo, which allowed us to look for Rita Krills. So we looked all over the US. We found them in New York. We found them in Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Florida. So we went and we looked for a second free internet tool called Wolfram Alpha. And we checked the weather reports for the day which this video had been uploaded. And when we went through all those various cities, we found that in Florida, there was thunderstorms and rain on the day. So we went to the white pages, and we found, we looked through the Rita Krills in the phone book, and we looked through a couple of different addresses. And that took us to Google Maps, where we found a house. And we found a house with a swimming pool that looked remarkably like Rita's. So we went back to the video, and we had to look for clues that we could cross-reference. So if you look in the video, there's the big umbrella, there's a white lilo in the pool, there are some unusually rounded edges in the swimming pool, and there's 2 trees in the background. And we went back to Google Maps, and we looked a little bit closer, and sure enough, there's the white lilo. There are the 2 trees. There's the umbrella. It's actually folded in this photo, a little bit of trickery, and there are the rounded edges on the swimming pool. So we were able to call Rita, clear the video, make sure that it had been shot, and then our...
Any privacy threats there? Perhaps. Anyway, you might wonder why I included this talking about smartphones. Well, what do we use our phones for? Probably Rita Krill used her smartphone. By time spent, what do we use the phones for? Browsing, number 1. Number 2, I can never remember. Social networking, listening to music, gaming, and guess what? We actually use them as phones too. So there's a lot of personal information on the phone. So a lot of privacy threats, potential. And the phones know what we buy, where we buy, when we buy it, how much money we have in the bank, whom we text it to. Dwight touched on this as well. Websites we visit, where we travel, what time we go to sleep. I hadn't thought of that. What time we wake up. You know, sleep is when you stop your phone activity. So the phone knows all that. Basically, it's your brain. Your smartphone is your brain. The problem with this brain is it's not attached to a body, and they're so easy to lose or have stolen. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't think I can live without this. So practically, what are we going to do? Well, there's some very practical things you can do. Put a screen lock on your phone. If you haven't done it yet, do it when you get home. It's called passcode on the iPhones, password. It depends what your make and model is. Put a screen lock on, so if somebody finds that phone or steals it, they can't go and get all your information. Put a lock after timeout. I have mine set so I can push a button to lock it, but I might forget, so have it time out. Mine is set to 1 minute, my timeout. Some of you might find that harder. You know, you're not over at the other end like I am. We say no more than 10 minutes. That's a long time. You can probably go a lot less than that. Encryption. Not all phones have encryption built into them. The good news is the older, less smart phones have less information storage capacity, so you probably have less to worry about. But if your phone has encryption capability, put it on. Because the passcode only stops someone who's going through the proper interface. If they plug in a cable or open the phone, they could still get the data. And if your phone has a feature, why not set it to auto-erase after less than or equal 10 tries on the password? Hopefully you're not using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of people do, apparently. But you can put the lock after bad attempts, and then at least you have to back your phone up, too, if it's going to auto-destruct. So make sure you get into a backup routine. Location-aware services. Like Dwight, I like cycling. I use mapmyride.com. It's an amazing mashup of GPS data and Google Maps. This is my favorite ride. I make these public. If you zoomed in, you'd be able to see the start and stop of my ride. So the practical step I take is and to their credit, mapmyride.com, they do it properly where by default each ride or run, they have the run product, it's private. Each one you have to go and specifically make it public. But before I do, I trim off the start and stop of my ride. So all my rides look like I stop and start from a nearby landmark, not actually at my house, because I choose not to reveal where I live to the entire world. Other than, like I do, editing or replacing the data, what else can you do? Battery pulls, not really practical anymore. Anybody with an iPhone? Can't take the battery out. My new Motorola, same thing. Power off, especially with encryption, it'll take a few extra seconds to start up. You probably don't want to do that, but you might be willing to do that. So if you want to go off grid for a while, these are a couple things, but how practical are they? I don't know. GPS off, airplane mode. They save power, but there's inconvenience. So you'll have to decide what's practical for you. For sensitive photos, and remember phones, that's what we're using these things for, not that many phone calls anymore. Don't take naked pictures with your phone. So we're maybe not as famous as some of these other people whose pictures have been somehow scooped off their phones, but just don't go there. A practical alternative might be use an old school, non-networked digital camera. If you really, if you really need to take those embarrassing photos. So, in conclusion, we live in an imperfect world, but we've got to participate in it because it's the only one. So do some things that you can. Go after the biggest risks. Hint, smartphone. I put a green check mark there because I believe you can all do it. It's not really that hard and not that inconvenient, and the risks warrant it. Use measures that are practical to you individually. Privacy visor, probably not so much. RFID wallet, starting in July, I suggest most of you might want to get one. Startpage.com, at least for your sensitive searches, or maybe even for everything like I do. Get in the habit of asking, why do you need that? Whether it's a web form asking for too much information, or in person, like why does the meat shop where I buy products or frozen vegetables or whatever it is, why do they need my phone number? And finally, remember the Barbara Streisand effect. Sometimes it's just better to lie low for your own data breaches that you cause yourself anyway. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for me? If not, that's perfect because I think I've used up all my time.